Have you ever faced something that seemed completely impossible? A problem so big, a challenge so overwhelming, that you had no idea how you could possibly overcome it. The Israelites faced exactly that kind of impossible situation when they stood before the massive walls of Jericho. But what happened there would become one of the most amazing demonstrations of faith and God's power in all of history. To understand this incredible story, we need to go back several weeks earlier to a moment of great sadness and great hope. For 40 years, the Israelites had been wandering in the wilderness. An entire generation had been born, grown up, and was now ready to enter the land God had promised to their ancestors. But there was one man who wouldn't be going with them. Moses, the great leader who had brought them out of Egypt, who had received the 10 Commandments, who had guided them for 4 decades. Moses had climbed Mount Nebo and looked across the Jordan River into the Promised Land. He could see it, the land flowing with milk and honey, the land God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob hundreds of years earlier. But because of a mistake Moses had made, God told him he could see the land but not enter it. There on the mountain, at 120 years old, Moses died, and the people mourned for 30 days. Now the Israelites had a new leader, a man named Joshua. Joshua had been Moses' assistant for 40 years. He had been one of only 2 spies who believed God could give them the Promised Land when they first arrived there decades earlier. He was a brave warrior, a faithful servant of God, and now he had the enormous responsibility of leading about 2 million people into a land filled with enemies. God spoke to Joshua with words of encouragement and challenge. "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give them. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous." 3 times in that conversation, God told Joshua to be strong and courageous. Why? Because what lay ahead would require tremendous courage and unshakable faith. The first obstacle wasn't even the enemy cities or armies. It was the Jordan River itself. This wasn't a small stream you could wade across. During harvest season, when the Israelites arrived, the Jordan was overflowing its banks. It was wide, deep, and rushing with powerful currents. How could 2 million people cross it? They had no boats, no bridges, no engineering equipment. But God had a plan. He instructed Joshua to have the priests carry the Ark of the Covenant, a sacred chest that represented God's presence, and walk toward the river. The ark would go first, and the people would follow. When the priest's feet touched the water's edge, something miraculous would happen. Can you imagine being one of those priests? You're carrying the most sacred object in your nation, walking toward a flooding river, and you're told that when your feet touch the water, God will do something. You can see the water rushing past. You can hear it roaring. Every instinct tells you that stepping into that river is dangerous, maybe even deadly. But the priests obeyed. They walked forward carrying the ark, and the moment their feet touched the water, an incredible miracle occurred. Upstream, at a town called Adam, the water stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap like an invisible dam was holding it back. The water downstream continued flowing toward the Dead Sea until the riverbed was completely dry. The priests carrying the ark stood in the middle of the dry riverbed, while all of Israel, men, women, children, animals, carts, everything, crossed over on dry ground. It must have taken hours, maybe even most of the day, for 2 million people to cross. But the priests stood there the entire time, holding the ark, standing on the spot where rushing water had been just moments before. When everyone had crossed, God told Joshua to have 12 men, one from each tribe, take stones from the middle of the Jordan and set them up as a memorial. These stones would remind future generations of what God had done that day. Finally, when the priests carrying the ark came up out of the riverbed, the waters of the Jordan returned and flowed as before. The Israelites were now in the Promised Land, and there was no going back. They set up camp at a place called Gilgal, near the city of Jericho. And it was there, looking across the plains, that they saw their next impossible obstacle, Jericho. Jericho was one of the oldest cities in the world, and it was a fortress. Archaeologists tell us that Jericho had 2 massive walls, an outer wall that was about 6 feet thick, and an inner wall that was about 12 feet thick, with a space of about 15 feet between them. Some experts believe the walls were about 20 to 30 feet high, maybe even higher. Houses were sometimes built in the space between the 2 walls. The city gates were massive and heavily guarded. No one came in or out without permission. And now, because the people of Jericho had heard about the Israelites crossing the Jordan River, the city was shut up tight. The gates were barred. Guards watched from the walls. The city was locked down, sealed like a fortress. For the Israelites, looking at those walls must have been terrifying. They had no siege equipment, no battering rams, no ladders tall enough to scale those walls, no engineering knowledge to tunnel under them. They were essentially a group of former slaves and wilderness wanderers facing one of the most fortified cities in the ancient world. It was impossible. Completely, utterly impossible. But before Joshua could even begin worrying about strategy, something extraordinary happened. One day, when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua, who was a warrior, didn't hesitate. He went up to the man and asked,
"Who are you? Are you for us or for our enemies?"
The man replied,
"Neither. I am the commander of the Lord's army."
Joshua immediately understood who this was. This wasn't just an angel. This was a divine being, possibly even a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ himself. Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked,
"What message does my Lord have?"
The commander of the Lord's army replied,
"Take off your shoes, for where you are standing is holy."
And Joshua did so. This encounter was crucial. It reminded Joshua that the battle for Jericho wasn't really Israel's battle. It was God's battle. The commander of the Lord's army had come, which meant that the real army wasn't the Israelite soldiers Joshua could see. The real army was the invisible army of heaven. Then God gave Joshua the battle plan for Jericho, but it wasn't like any military strategy ever used before or since. "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands," God said to Joshua. Notice that. God spoke of it as already accomplished. The victory was already won. Joshua just had to walk it out in faith. Then came the instructions. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have all the people give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and the people will go up, every man straight in. Let's think about this strategy for a moment. No battering rams, no siege towers, no tunneling, no attacking the gates. Just walking. Walking around the city once a day for 6 days, and 7 times on the 7th day. then shouting. That was it. That was the plan. If Joshua had been depending on his own military wisdom, he might have laughed, or objected, or asked for a plan that made more sense. But Joshua had learned something over his many years following God. When God gives instructions, you obey, even if they don't make sense, especially if they don't make sense. So Joshua gathered all the people and explained the plan. He organized them carefully. The armed guard would go first, then 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horn trumpets would come next. Then the Ark of the Covenant would be carried by priests. Then the rear guard would follow, and the rest of the people would follow behind. Joshua gave the people one important command. Do not give a war cry. Do not raise your voices. Do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout. Then shout. On the first day, the procession began. Can you imagine what this looked like? Thousands of armed men marching silently, 7 priests blowing ram's horn trumpets, the Ark of the Covenant being carried with great reverence, more soldiers following, all of them walking around this massive fortress city. The people inside Jericho must have watched from the walls in confusion. What were these Israelites doing? Why were they just walking? Where were their weapons? Where were their siege engines? What kind of attack was this? They walked all the way around the city, which probably took about 40 minutes to an hour. And then they returned to camp. That was it for day 1. On the second day, they did it again. The same silent procession, the same trumpets blowing, the same march around the city. Then back to camp. Day 3, the same thing. Day 4, still marching, still silent except for the trumpets, still just walking around these impossible walls. By now, the people of Jericho were probably feeling more confident. Maybe they were even mocking the Israelites. Is this your great army? Is this how the people who crossed the Jordan on dry ground plan to conquer us, just walking around our walls? Day 5. The Israelites kept marching, not a word spoken except for the blast of the ram's horns. Around the city once, then back to camp. Day 6. More of the same. Some of the Israelites might have started wondering if this plan was really going to work. The walls looked just as strong as they had on day 1. Nothing had changed. Was anything going to happen? But God was testing their faith. Would they obey even when it didn't make sense? Would they keep following His instructions even when they didn't see immediate results? Would they trust Him even when the situation looked impossible? Then came the 7th day. On this day, they got up at daybreak. The same procession formed, armed guard, priests with trumpets, the ark, rear guard, and all the people. They began marching around the city, but this time, when they completed the first circuit, they didn't return to camp. They kept going. They marched around the city a second time, then a third time, then a 4th, 5th, and 6th time. The people of Jericho must have been getting nervous now. Something was different about today. The Israelites had already marched around 6 times, and the sun was climbing higher in the sky. What was happening? On the 7th time around, when the priests blew a long blast on the trumpets, Joshua commanded the people,
Shout, for the Lord has given you the city!
2 million voices raised together in a mighty war cry. The sound must have been deafening, echoing off the hills, filling the air with a roar of faith and victory. And then it happened. The walls of Jericho collapsed. Not just a section, not just a weak spot. The entire wall system, both the outer wall and the inner wall, fell down flat. Some archaeologists believe the walls fell outward and downward, creating ramps of rubble that the Israelites could climb right into the city. Think about what this means. If the walls had fallen inward, the rubble would have blocked the Israelites from entering. If only part of the wall had fallen, there would have been a battle at the breach. But the walls fell outward and flat, creating easy access from every direction. Every Israelite soldier could go straight in, just as God had said.
The Lord has given us the city. Now we claim it!
The city was taken that day. The Israelites destroyed everything in the city as God had commanded, except for one family, the family of a woman named Rahab. Rahab's story is important to this miracle. Several weeks earlier, before the Israelites crossed the Jordan, Joshua had sent 2 spies into Jericho to scout out the land. These spies went to Rahab's house, which was built into the city wall. Rahab was a prostitute, a woman at the bottom of society's social order, but she had heard about the Israelites' God, how he had parted the Red Sea when they left Egypt, how he had defeated powerful kings, how he had been with them in the wilderness. And Rahab believed. When the king of Jericho sent soldiers to capture the spies, Rahab hid them on her roof under stalks of flax. She lied to the soldiers, telling them the spies had already left the city. Then, when it was safe, she went up to the roof and spoke to the Israelite spies. "I know that the Lord has given this land to you," Rahab said. "A great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. When we heard of it, our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed because of you, for the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." Then Rahab made a request.
"Please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to me and my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save them from death."
The spies agreed. They told Rahab to tie a scarlet cord in her window, the same window she would lower them down from to escape the city. When the Israelites attacked, everyone in the house with the scarlet cord would be saved.
"Go quickly. We pray for your safety."
We won't forget this. Thank you.
Rahab helped the spies escape and tied the scarlet cord in her window. And now, when the walls fell, Joshua sent those same 2 spies to bring Rahab and her family out safely. While the entire city was destroyed, Rahab and her family were saved.
You kept your word. We are safe.
Yes, you are safe now. Come with us.
Look, Mother, they are here.
The prostitute who had faith in Israel's God became a part of God's people. In fact, Rahab later married an Israelite man named Salmon, and she became an ancestor of King David and ultimately of Jesus Christ himself. Her name appears in the genealogy of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. A Canaanite prostitute became part of the lineage of the Messiah, all because she had faith in the God of Israel. After the walls fell and the city was conquered, Joshua pronounced a curse on anyone who would attempt to rebuild Jericho. Then he burned the city and took all the silver, gold, bronze, and iron articles and put them into the treasury of the Lord's house. The destruction of Jericho sent shockwaves throughout Canaan. When the other kings in the land heard about it, they were terrified. The impossible had happened. The mightiest fortress in the region had fallen to an army that had simply walked around it and shouted. But the fall of Jericho was more than just a military victory. It was a declaration. It announced to everyone in Canaan and to the Israelites themselves that the Lord God was with his people. The same God who had parted the Red Sea, who had provided manna in the wilderness, who had just stopped the Jordan River, had now brought down the walls of Jericho. Nothing was impossible for him. For the Israelites, Jericho was the first step in possessing the promised land. It was proof that God would fight for them. It was confirmation that his promises were trustworthy. If God could bring down the walls of Jericho, he could give them the entire land. The victory at Jericho set the tone for the conquest of Canaan. Yes, there would be other battles. Yes, there would be challenges ahead. But the Israelites had seen with their own eyes that when they obeyed God completely, even when His instructions didn't make sense, He would give them victory over impossible obstacles. The ruins of Jericho remained as a testimony for generations. Anyone passing by could see the fallen walls and remember what God had done. Parents could point to those ruins and tell their children the story. That's where God brought down massive walls because His people trusted Him and obeyed His instructions. Centuries later, the author of Hebrews would write about this event as one of the great examples of faith. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the people had marched around them for 7 days. By faith. That's what brought down the walls. Not military might, not superior strategy, not advanced weapons. Faith, trust in God, obedience to His instructions even when they didn't make sense. The fall of Jericho reminds us that God's ways are not our ways. His strategies don't always make sense to human logic. He often asks us to do things that seem foolish or pointless. He tests our faith by giving instructions that don't seem to lead to victory. But when we obey Him completely, when we trust Him fully, when we follow His instructions exactly, even when they don't make sense, He does the impossible. The story of Jericho teaches us powerful truths that are just as important today as they were 3,500 years ago. First, obedience must come before victory. The Israelites had to march around the city for 7 days before the walls fell. They had to do exactly what God said, in exactly the way He said to do it, before they saw results. How many of us give up after 1 or 2 days of marching around our Jericho? How often do we decide God's instructions don't make sense and try our own strategy instead? Victory comes through obedience, even when we don't understand the plan. Second, God's methods often seem foolish to human wisdom. Walking around a city, blowing trumpets, shouting, that's not how you conquer a fortress. But God deliberately chooses methods that force us to depend on Him rather than on our own strength or intelligence. The Apostle Paul later wrote, "God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong." When we see impossible victories happen through seemingly foolish methods, everyone knows it was God who did it, not us. Third, the battle belongs to the Lord. Joshua's encounter with the commander of the Lord's army reminded him that this wasn't really Israel's battle. It was God's. We often think we have to figure everything out, that we have to make things happen through our own effort. But the truth is, our job is simply to obey. Fourth, patience and persistence in faith are essential. For 6 days, nothing happened. The walls looked just as strong on day 6 as they had on day 1. Some people might have given up. Some might have complained that God's plan wasn't working. But the Israelites kept marching, kept trusting, kept obeying, and on the 7th day, they saw the breakthrough. Don't give up before your 7th day comes. Keep trusting, keep obeying. The breakthrough is coming. Fifth, faith includes everyone, even the unlikely and the outcast. Rahab was a Canaanite prostitute, about as far from being one of God's people as you could get. But her faith saved her. She believed in Israel's God when her own people didn't. And God not only saved her, but made her part of the lineage of the Messiah. No one is too far from God's grace. No one is too sinful to be saved. Faith is what matters, not your background or your past. Sixth, complete obedience is required. Joshua told the people not to shout until he gave the command. Imagine if some soldiers had gotten impatient and shouted on day 3 or day 5. They would have disobeyed God's specific instructions. Sometimes God asks us to do something and to do it in a specific way at a specific time. Partial obedience is disobedience. God deserves complete obedience, not our edited version of His instructions. Finally, God uses victories to build our faith for future challenges. Jericho was the first major city the Israelites conquered in Canaan. It was the hardest, the most impossible, and God gave them victory there first to build their faith for all the battles that would follow. When you face your next impossible situation, you can look back at the Jerichos where God has already given you victory. If He did it before, He can do it again. What is your Jericho? What impossible situation are you facing right now? What massive wall stands between you and what God has promised you? Maybe it's a financial problem that seems insurmountable. Maybe it's a health issue that has no human solution. Maybe it's a relationship that appears beyond repair. Maybe it's a dream that seems impossible to achieve. Whatever your Jericho is, remember this. The same God who brought down the walls of Jericho is still in the business of doing the impossible. He hasn't changed. His power hasn't diminished. He still responds to faith and obedience. But you have to be willing to do things His way, even when His way doesn't make sense. You have to be willing to keep marching around your Jericho even when nothing seems to be happening. You have to be willing to wait for His timing, trust His methods, and obey His instructions completely. The people of Israel could have looked at those massive walls and said, "It's impossible. We can't do this." And they would have been right. They couldn't do it. But God could. And when they trusted Him and obeyed Him, the impossible became possible. The walls came down, not because of human strength, not because of military brilliance, not because of advanced technology. The walls came down because God's people trusted Him enough to do something that looked completely foolish, and God showed up in power. If this story blessed you, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. God bless you.